Kia ora, g'day, good evening. Steve here from the Cosmic Banter podcast. Now, I had a few thoughts on the whole response online, particularly on X, on Twitter, to the recent Jake Barber interview with Ross Coulthart over the weekend. Now, I'm a little rambly, so couldn't fit this in a tweet, and it ended up being a bit of an article. I thought, screw it. Let's read it out. Let's make it a little mini podcast episode in and of itself. I'll try and maintain eye contact, but excuse me if I need to look down and read. Let's jump in. I've got a bone to pick with the UFO community. It's become increasingly cynical, impatient, desensitized, and almost, well, quite frankly, spoiled. The latest meltdown evidencing this cynicism was the real-time response to Ross Coulthart and NewsNation's special report titled "Whistleblower Reveals UAP Retrieval Program. Object Caught on Video." The whistleblower in question being decorated United States Air Force Special Operations helicopter pilot Jake Barber. The object in question being a purported craft of non-human origin, now affectionately known as the Egg, after, well, its egg-shaped appearance. Now, cynicism comes in all shapes and sizes, different motives, different origins, different justifications. For the sake of discussion, let's take the opinions of the uninitiated and the chronic debunkers as read. I think all of us here can agree that their viewpoints are just way too black and white for us to spare any oxygen. With the debunkers, it's all aliens have never visited our planet, and I will die by this statement. And with the uninitiated crowd, the topic hoppers, as I like to call them, you've noticed how on every single UAP-related post, they only seem capable of writing one of two phrases. Either it's just Project Bluebeam, or, more to the point, PSYOP. But for the cynics within the UFO community, they appear to fall into three main categories. Firstly, you have those who feel like they've been let down one too many times by grifters, by disinformation, and by the once respected thought leaders of the space who've failed yet again to deliver anything of substance. Then there are those who believe in the phenomenon, but whose sole contribution to this topic is to apply blanket skepticism. Well-intentioned in its origin, this now seems to embody their very identity. And lastly, there's a cohort who, for whatever personal reasons, demand expectations that are impractically high. This fosters an almost deranged level of pessimism and results in perpetual disappointment each time a new video or whistleblower comes out. Regarding Jake Barber's alleged retrieval of this egg UFO, as far as I can tell, the vast majority of this pervasive cynicism is focused on the footage itself. Definitive statements are thrown around like candy. Children's clickbait, if you will. The military have experimental vehicles that look like this. Occam's razor always sells it. It looks like a macro shot of some string dangling an actual egg over, I don't know, a furry green mat. Or the classic, AI could generate this in seconds. And there's more sweeping dismissals, such as, this video still isn't clear enough, it's still not long enough, it could still be faked easily. Where did this footage come from? You can never trust the authenticity of these videos or their sources. Now, I don't wish to sound condescending, but I think we all need a gentle reminder that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It may be pedantic and futile of me to suggest, but I'd argue that Jake's story does in fact already have an abundance of evidence. Perhaps just not the subjective holy grail evidence that would satisfy these cynics. Our news feeds are now littered with never-ending whataboutisms that, by nature, are impossible to argue against. And therein lies the problem. The footage itself cannot be critiqued without firstly having applied an equal level of critique to the context of said footage. Now, of course we can't say with 100% certainty whether or not the footage of the story were real, because none of us worked in the alleged crashed UAP crash retrieval program. None of us shot the footage from the chopper, and none of us worked for NewsNation to research and publish the story. So, having established that context is king, let's forget about the bloody egg for a second. Let's zoom out. I challenge those of you who were unimpressed with our introduction to Jake Barber to go back and re-watch the NewsNation report in its entirety. By the time you watch this, there may also be the 2.5-hour uncut version released by NewsNation. Analyse the broader scope of Jake's testimony and try to come back with some hot takes that aren't quite as, intellectually lazy. Consider the layers of effort a story like this requires. The theatrical skill it would take for Jake to cry on camera like he did. The personal and professional liability that he imposed upon himself for expressing all of that supernatural woo-woo when he described his deeply personal spiritual experience whilst retrieving the second craft. Consider Ross Coulthart's personal and professional reputation. As a reminder, we're talking about a trained attorney here, a highly experienced investigative journalist whose reporting on scandals with the Iraq War and the Catholic Church, among numerous other impactful issues, earned him several coveted awards. He's like the Hindenburg research of journalism, albeit a little less profit-driven, and I guess the feathers that Ross ruffled didn't lead him to bankruptcy. Actually, come to think of it, the CEO of Hindenburg Research didn't need to implement a precautionary kill switch either. Perhaps not the most apt analogy. But look, Ross is an Aussie. I'm not actually being trite here. Us down under folk really are straight shooters. New Zealand, for example, is the least corrupt nation on earth. Perhaps it's no coincidence that Ross was raised and educated in the beautiful land of Aotearoa. Just like Russell Crowe, I think we might just have the right to claim him. But look, enough of the Coulthart glazing. I know you guys hate that, and he might be a complete prick for all I know. The point is, up until now, Ross was highly respected across the UFO community. An eloquent, rational, and relentlessly passionate spokesman who helped to legitimize our beloved subject in the mainstream. A new hope. But honeymoons don't last. Beholden to an incredibly high standard set by we, the people, even old mate Coulthart is now subject to irrational levels of scrutiny. Mere associations with divisive figures such as Lou Elizondo and Dr. Stephen Greer are apparently enough now to make all of Ross's work redundant. We've seen the same thing happen with the aforementioned Elizondo and Greer, and people have now started to turn on Jeremy Corbell for his recent, shall we say, temper tantrums. "But mommy, it's not fair that Big Bro gets all the credit." George Knapp enters from stage left. "Schellenberger, I'ma let you finish, but Jeremy had one of the best immaculate constipations of all time." Okay, that was cringe. Can we get back to the Jake Barber story now? Thanks. If Coulthart were embellishing the Jake Barber story, if not outright lying, then why on earth would such an intelligent and tenured investigative journalist think that he'd be capable of deceiving such a cynical audience as us? Likewise, what about the personal and professional reputations of Jake's decorated colleagues who went on the record to support him? Don Bales, tenured Special Operations soldier; Fred Baker, Special Warfare veteran; and most impressively, Lieutenant Colonel John Blitch, an ex-Delta Force sniper, a former commander of a nuclear weaponry battalion. Oh, and just casually, he also holds a doctorate in psychology. Yeah, that seems like a guy who has a little bit to lose. Lastly, what about the producers, the researchers, and the executives at NewsNation, whose careers and whose entire network credibility was on the line? Now, to strawman one of the more outlandish theories, let's assume for a second that Ross and or NewsNation were fed deliberate disinformation from some, covert outfit or double agent. This would be a pretty sloppy, rushed operation on their part, and it would require some equally lazy, lackluster due diligence carried out by NewsNation. Also, could they not have made the story just a little bit more compelling? No offense, Jake, but an egg? And what's all this crap about you being possessed by the divine feminine? What, you didn't even see an alien? It was just a frequency? Man, you spooks fumbled this one, really. All it would have taken to convince us is some 4K footage of a Bob Lazar craft from Project Graviteur, and, you could dress little Elizondo in a small grey suit. There you go. Disclosure. Once you've applied an equal level of critique to all of the aforementioned context, not just the retrieval footage itself, then you'll find that the assumption this has somehow all been faked or embellished actually starts to sound rather unhinged, even more so than if the truth really was just as NewsNation had presented it to us, eggs, psionics, and all. So, make a judgment call based on whether you are satisfied with the facts at hand. Determine whether you're comfortable with any details that were left out, or left unexplained, or went unacknowledged. Cross-check the sources. Analyse NewsNation's vetting process. Find what your gut feeling says about the interviewees themselves. How compelling did you find the narrative as a whole? We must attempt to apply a level of objectivity in our judgments and character assessments. Each and every day, these same judgment calls are demanded of us in hundreds of scenarios. You don't just live out your life shaking your head dismissively at every little inconvenience or contradiction, just as you don't impulsively accept everything at face value. That just leads to intellectual inertia. Instead, you scrutinize all of the available information, not just the parts that support your pre-existing biases. Now, I'll let you go in a moment, I promise, but genuine question. Are you consciously choosing to ignore the wider context behind all of these allegations? I doubt it. No one would want to admit that, right? So therefore, the question becomes, what underlying biases, frustrations, or other motivating factors are limiting your scope of discernment? It's not a criticism. I do it. We all do it. We're just human, after all. Well, I wouldn't put it past some of you to be malevolent reptilians from the Draco star system, but I digress. Whichever factors are impeding your ability to remain fully objective, you at least have to acknowledge these before you start spewing your opinions out into the algorithm. And finally, to those of you in the third category I mentioned earlier, the ones who just found the entire egg story underwhelming, I pose this question to you. What more do you want? Seriously, can you articulate what exactly would satisfy your apprehension? Because, and I say this without hyperbole, Trump could authorize the release of footage from Roswell. He could roll the craft itself, encourage independent, peer-reviewed analysis of the craft material, and, I don't know, he could even set up an unrestricted, open casket viewing ceremony of the alien bodies, and you still wouldn't be satisfied, would you? I get that you can't trust anything at face value. I get that hype often leads to disappointment, and I share in your frustration that for so long you've had the waters muddied, misinformation, disinformation, broken promises, lackluster evidence, half-truths that are hidden behind pesky NDAs. All of it has a compounding effect on our pessimism. Clearly, the pursuit of transparency is an exhausting one. But if nothing is ever good enough for us, then perhaps we should abort the entire conversation. No? You don't want that either? Well, then I'd encourage you to reveal this magical disclosure blueprint that you've clearly been keeping from us this entire time. Oh, that's right. There isn't one. This is our first time doing this. Yes. Even the lads over there at Project Bluebeam are getting pre-game nerves. So look, shall we stop bickering? Shall we start working together and attempt some type of discourse that's a little more, I don't know, unifying? After all, freedom and unity are the very bedrock of the proverbial promised land that we all like to call disclosure. Just some egg for thought. Peace. This is a bit of a long shot, but Jake Barber, if you're listening, if this video somehow finds you, or if there's someone out there that can get a hold of Jake, look mate, I would love to interview you. I appreciate you must be pretty busy, and this whole process must have been pretty emotional, I can only imagine, with all the scrutiny and attention, I suppose, for the first time. But look, no pressure. I'm just a Kiwi lad with under 50 subscribers, even less on YouTube, but there's more on Spotify. Trust me, bro. But yeah, look, no pressure. I mean, I would really, really love to deep dive into your personal experiences, less about this footage. It wasn't even your footage. You know, I'm sure you're getting sick of defending, or at least feeling pressure to defend that video. That's for Ross Coulthart and NewsNation to defend. And I think your spiritual experiences, the spiritual side to your story, is really the most interesting part. And my show, it started out with the intention of it being one where I would interview people who'd seen UFOs, and it sort of turned into a supernatural podcast because people had had all these other supernatural encounters. And I quickly realized, as you very well know from your own experience that you can't separate the two. So, yeah, I would love to speak with you. Again, this is a long shot, but if this does reach you, please reach out to me, DM me on any of those platforms. And likewise, in fact, more likely, seeing as Jake probably won't see this, if you or anyone else you know has had any kind of supernatural encounter, I would love to speak to you and give you a safe platform to comfortably share your story on this, the Cosmic Banter Podcast. So, hopefully speak to you soon, Jake. Otherwise, hopefully speak to you, whoever you are. Thanks for watching. Have a lovely night. Peace.